All right. Do I have everyone's permission to record you? Yes.
Yes.
To record your expressions.
It's
Dynamic and lively profile pictures included. All right. Sharing screen. So I just sent out an email covering some important updates. There are instructions on the extra credit assignment, which I mentioned in Tuesday's Zoom session there, and on Blackboard. I'm asking people, if you want the extra credit, you can submit 3 discussion questions on the optional reading by Lindsay Moore called Frayed Connections, Fraught Projections, The Troubling Work of Shirin Neshat. It's a good essay. It's a really interesting artist. She's an Iranian expatriate artist who works primarily in the realm of video projection. We haven't really talked much about works in that medium, so that might be of interest. And then if you submit your 3 discussion questions to me on Blackboard by midnight next Monday, you'll get one point of extra credit guaranteed. If you are lucky enough to have your questions selected for actual discussion in class on next Tuesday, then you'll get an additional 2 points of extra credit. So 3 points of extra credit in total. That could make your grade, make your whole day. I will be selecting at least one question from a minimum of 6 different students. That's assuming I get questions from 6 different people in the class. If I get less than that, then anyone who submits a question is guaranteed to get 3 points. So odds are good, you know. I think the odds are in your favor. I doubt that every single class member will be doing the assignment. So I think you've got a good shot at getting the 3 points, especially if you put a little thought into your questions and try to come up with some questions that'll make for a good discussion. Because God knows I'm running out of material. Like actually, there's plenty of material. There's plenty of stuff to talk about, but I'm running out of ways to stimulate discussion, it seems. I haven't been doing a good job of that recently. A little song and dance. Yeah, I need a better setup here for that. I need like a home studio setup.
Oh shoot, sir! We could be playing some D&D and turn this into a little D&D session.
We could, but it might get back to my colleagues or the department head or
just tell them it's a new innovative way of learning it to stimulate our little thonkin brains because it's art related.
Well, maybe I'll work on that.
That sounds like a no, but okay.
Okay, so what were we talking about on Tuesday? Can anyone recap? Refresh our memories. Is anyone paying attention? I didn't even know if anyone was still like sitting in front of their computer by the end of the class because it went on too long, like usual, and nobody's cameras were on. So
Maya's was. Well, she was there.
Maya was there. That's true. Maya hung on to the bitter end because I heard from her.
I had a doctor's appointment at 2 and my mom was like, "What are you doing? Come on." And I was like, "Oh, that's still talking. Wow, you really go."
All right. No, but I've got my phone next to me. So today I'm going to keep one eye on the time. I'm not going to let it get away from me this time. Plus, this is really dragged on. This is like our 3rd class session on relational aesthetics, so we need to get this done.
He said, "Hurry up."
So yeah, okay. So what were we talking about? What are we like this comparison here? What is going on? What do these works have in common? Anybody?
They're both staged. Didn't we say that?
Yeah. They're both kind of trafficking in this realm of fictionalized autobiography. Both Christian Boltanski and Sophie Calle present, both French artists, incidentally. They both present relics or traces or documents of life moments, life events, childhood histories, and so forth, but in a way that causes us to question their veracity. And Sophie Calle herself, very explicitly informs the viewer of the work on the right, The Fake Wedding, that this is, and in the title, that this was not that this is not a real wedding ceremony. She and her partner of the time of that moment got hitched in Las Vegas, and she missed out on the chance to put on the wedding dress and have the whole ceremony. So decided to stage a ceremony, a fake ceremony, some weeks or months after the fact. Christian Boltanski's 10 photographic portraits of Christian Boltanski, 1946 to 1964, purport to show the artist from, in these photographs taken supposedly over the course of these years, these 20 years from 1946 to 1964, from early childhood through early adulthood. But if we look more closely at the photographs, we recognize that it's clearly not the same person in all of these pictures, even though they are arranged seemingly from youngest to oldest. And then the whole notion that that he could have carried out a project like this, or that somebody would have come up with the idea of taking these portrait photographs every year in the exact same location over the course of 20 years, it causes us to question, the truth of the artist's statements. So, this notion of fiction and kind of fictional performances of the self is a source of inspiration for a number of artists who kind of use their own life, their own lives as material for their art. One that we briefly mentioned at the end of class on Tuesday is Alex Lambert, who seems like she might have taken a leaf from Sophie Calle's book, but to do her one better, or to upstage Sophie Calle at her own game, she decided not to have one fake wedding, but 4. Over the course of a 6-month period, she married 4 different people, all for the sake of her art, presumably. This interest in fiction, it goes beyond these kinds of fictionalized or deceptive self-presentations or stagings of a life, to include works by artists who are very interested in exploring the boundary between fiction and reality, this exploring the assumption, the kind of built-in assumption that art deals in fictions, and that the artist, in order to say something meaningful, needs to break out of this bubble and engage with reality, with the real world. This is coming on the heels of several decades of work by artists which looked very critically and kind of polemically at the institutional structures, the institutional context for arts, like for art exhibition and and collection and so forth. Like the work of these institutional critique artists such as Michael Asher and Hans Hacke, various others that we've discussed in previous weeks. This crop of artists, the group of artists that Nicolas Bourriaud categorizes under the as relational aesthetics, under this heading of relational aesthetics, their work tends to be less overtly political, and maybe more skeptical in general about the idea, in both more utopian in some ways, if we're talking about artists like Rirkrit Tirvanija, this idea of turning over the gallery space into a kind of crash pad for visitors where they're served free curry, but also more skeptical or I don't know, more maybe ironic is a better term. There's more sort of self-awareness here in some of these works. Philippe Perreno, here we're talking about yet another French artist, and maybe that's no coincidence since Nicolas Bourriaud, the curator himself, who invented the term relational aesthetics, is French. He carried out this work called No More Reality in 1993, which took the form of a protest. So you see a photograph of this action here. Now, what catches your attention about this particular image viewed as a protest photo? What is unusual about it? How is this protest photo different from all other protest photos you may have seen?
This one looks more manageable, like contained, versus when you see a protest now, it's in a huge masses and it can turn pretty violent pretty quickly.
Okay.
Someone has like a contradicting view of what they are protesting. So this seems more like I guess kind of like not really a false reality, but it looks more maintained than versus the we are used to seeing like now versus how I guess it used to be back then.
So do you mean that it just looks like a smaller scale?
I mean, I guess kind of smaller
protest?
scale, but it's more like seems, I don't know, this looks more unusual for me to like see because I'm so used to seeing like a huge
crowd.
Yeah.
Yeah. Right. Yeah, like the kinds of protests that get media attention tend to be very, very massive these days, right? And
sorry.
Yeah, go ahead, Caitlin.
I could be totally wrong because the picture's kind of really tiny for me to see, but are those kids or are those just far away?
Yeah, they are children.
They are children, okay.
Right.
You can teach them while they're young.
Yeah. Well, I mean, it's not like you never see kids at protests, but generally, they're outnumbered by the adults, right? And in this particular image, we don't see any adults. At least I don't see any adults. It is a little bit of a blurry, low resolution image, kind of a small picture. But all the people who are clearly visible are young people, right? Like very young, like maybe no more than 9 or 10, I would guess.
Yeah.
Most of those kids. Okay, so what are they protesting anyway?
No more reality.
Yeah, that's what it says on the signs, right?
Yeah.
So it's a protest against reality.
Oof.
It kind of reminds me of, I can't imagine any of you, I think it's very unlikely that any of you have seen this movie, but there's a David Cronenberg film called Existence with a Z, about this virtual reality video game. And the players of the game find themselves unable to differentiate between the game and reality. They think that they're trapped in the game, but maybe that actually is the game scenario. And then there are these terrorists who show up while they're in the game, maybe. And the terrorists, the slogan of the terrorists is like an end to reality. They're militant, engaged in this militant struggle against reality. So the idea of kids, protesting reality is maybe kind of a paradoxical one, right? It's true that we think of childhood as the domain of imagination and fantasy. And we might be able to appreciate why kids would prefer their fantasy or their imaginative activities to reality. Reality for them is like school and making their bed and brushing their teeth and doing their homework and all that sort of thing. But on the other hand, the idea that the appropriate way of dealing with the real world, or the pressures or the expectations and responsibilities of reality, would be to stage a protest against it. Like protests, they're very serious, real things, right? Unless, we choose to reconceptualize them. Maybe that's what Philippe Perreno is trying to do here, to reconceptualize protests and the whole history, really, of activism, political activism in the public realm, in a more whimsical, imaginative way. Unless we choose to look at it the other way around and see this as a kind of critique of the over seriousness of activist art projects, such as maybe, for example, some of the projects associated with Mary Jane Jacobs' Culture in Action. I think that would make for an interesting contrast or comparison. Another work Perreno created was also inspired by the idea of this play, or this kind of interplay between fiction and reality. He produced a novel, or maybe it's like a novella. I'm not sure how long this text actually is, called Snow Dancing, which I think was based on a conversation he had with some of his artist friends, where he or they collectively were kind of spinning out this fantasy about an imaginary party, made-up party. And the description of the party is in some ways very vague and open-ended. In other ways, it's very specific. And of course, the description itself is slightly nonsensical. Like when he says everyone at the party is in the style of manga comic, with the complex backstories that those characters typically bring to the plot. So this story about a party is also kind of a story about these different stories, each person's story, and the ways in which the conversations or the interactions among the people at the party take the form of a story or a narrative. this would provide the inspiration for a real life, quote unquote, event, a party that was staged or that was thrown at a contemporary arts center in Dijon, France. The idea was that it would be kind of organized along lines suggested by the description in this this narrative that Perino dictated to his friends Liam Gillick and Jack Wendler, and they planned and carried out the event in such a way that it lasted exactly 1.5 hours, which is how long Perino's original narrative had lasted. You know, how long it took him to dictate the story of this party. So the idea of throwing a party, you know, or hosting an event, calling that a work of art, this is not a new concept for us. Having looked at and discussed Tervenija's work, and related it to, you know, works by other artists that invoke similar ideas of generosity. You know, Felix Gonzalez Torres's candy piles or stacks. These structures created by Liam Gillick, which are intended to serve as the props or the backdrops for conversation, for discussion. But we see here, you know, looking across the range of these different artists' works, a lot of differences, right? A lot of variation. It's not as simple as saying that, you know, the party is the work of art, like the opening is the work of art. Pereno's snow dancing brings in all these other interests with in narration, in fiction, that we don't find in those in Tervenija's work, at least, let's say. So this is from another exhibition of Pereno's work. It's called Speech Bubbles. So those things that you see clustered against the ceiling, any idea what those are? Can you make it out in the photograph here?
Like balloons?
Balloons, yeah. They're those shiny, reflective mylar balloons, right? Kind of metallic looking. So what does this work seem to be about? How can we relate it to these other pieces? No More Reality, Snow Dancing, or works by other artists that maybe engage the space of the gallery or the exhibition, the space, in a new way. Any thoughts?
Well, it makes people look up because there's nothing else in the room.
Right. So the walls are purposely blank, right? So the place where you normally look to find the art, to experience the art, does not have any, you know, does not meet your expectations halfway. And so, you know, you look up and you see something that you didn't expect to see, and you realize, oh, maybe this is the art
Right.
So why balloons? Why mylar balloons? I mean,
Well, they're very eye-catching, but balloons are contained. This might be a little bit far out, but they contain air, or if you blow them up, your air, so your speech. I don't know. That's a little bit far out there.
yeah, no, I think you are certainly on the right track, just to judge by the title of the piece, right, which is speech bubbles.
Right.
So that's an interesting idea, the idea that a balloon, which we fill with air from our lungs normally, could also be filled with speech. It's something else that we expel into the world through our mouths. So the idea that each one of these balloons maybe contains some scrap of speech or conversation, which obviously we will never be able to apprehend, even if we were to pop them or let out the air. But it kind of provokes us to imagine, what those words might have been, what kind of speech might fill these balloons. Other thoughts? I don't know if did you have more to say about that?
It's interesting. Are the balloons must just be the metallic and they're reflecting the floor. So I was gonna say it's an interesting place to be red.
Yes,
Yeah, I was gonna
exactly.
say that.
Yeah, so they're like silvery, mylar, but reflective. So the red color that you see is the reflection of the floor. So just as we look up and see the ceiling and note it and say, oh, the art's up there, it's on the ceiling. The reflections immediately focus our attention on the carpet, which does not look like your typical gallery, art gallery floor, right? This rich, luxurious red, kind of velvety carpet. So what is the significance of the carpet, or of this relay between, balloons and carpet? What associations do we bring to this kind of red carpet?
Well,
Like famous, like the red carpet at a premiere.
Yeah, at a movie premiere or at the Oscars, right? You got the whole red carpet thing. The stars clamber out of their limousines and walk down the red carpet, and everybody
Sounds like the Met Gala.
admires their fancy designer dresses or what have you. So red carpets have this association with very fancy, exclusive parties, with celebrity. So bringing it back to the idea of the party that animated his piece Snow Dancing, but also opening on to this other realm of celebrity, of Hollywood, the film industry. Here's a close-up. Something else you notice about these balloons, about their shape? What's unusual about the shape of these balloons?
They look like, I don't know, from the first picture, I thought they were fish. And then they're very oval, so they look like, I think of like red blood cells or something.
Oh, interesting. Yeah. Anything else? If you look closely, you'll see more to it than just the oval.
Does it have like a leg or a hook or something?
Yeah, it's got a little projection, right? A little appendage there. So what
They
could
look like
that
bugs now.
represent?
A bug.
A bug. Gross.
I mean, a cockroach.
Ew.
Oh, from the
Ew.
Yeah, from the back.
Like speech bubbles from like the
Speech
title.
bubbles. Yeah.
Oh.
Yeah. There we go.
Took me a second.
Yeah.
I'm dumb.
Um,
Clever.
so yeah, there was an earlier version featuring white bubbles, and they were carried kind of like the signs being carried around in this protest against reality here. So there was originally this idea that these speech bubbles could provide, and the artist has talked about this, like this was partly his intention, that these speech bubbles could furnish the props for some kind of protest, some kind of protest action. But instead of handing out signs to people, you show up for a protest and either you've created your own signs ahead of time to bring to the event, or somebody hands you a sign to carry, and the content, the message is usually pretty scripted. If you're protesting climate change or whatever, you'll have signs saying things like "Save the Earth" or "Reduce emissions now" or whatever. So Pereno is exploring the idea of a completely open-ended form of communication in which the content of the message that is being communicated by this protest is not determined in advance. And unlike a blank sign, a white balloon is maybe not even really built to carry writing. So maybe it kind of also forecloses the possibility of fixing or determining a specific type of message or messaging. But for this version with the red carpet, he's going more in the direction of the entertainment industry and the kinds of spectacles, parties, award ceremonies, and so forth associated with that. And we know that he has an interest in this because he's created other pieces. You can see it kind of in the background, that room in the back of this main, or this larger space with the lights. If you were to walk through, you would see this. It's a movie marquee. So what's interesting or remarkable about this particular movie marquee that maybe distinguishes it from other movie marquees that you've seen? It's not, it's not it's not an object that we encounter so much outside movie theaters anymore. But if any of you have gone to Asheville, you'll see outside like the Fine Arts Theater, they still have a marquee, kind of old-fashioned sign board sort of thing, illuminated sideboard. Normally, what do you expect to find on a signboard, on a marquee like this? What is their function?
To show Ruby times.
Yeah, to show exactly. Yeah, to advertise the names of the movies that are being shown and maybe their times. And this one is blank. So like the speech bubbles, the empty speech bubbles, you've got the trappings of this event, a screening, maybe a premiere. And it's all lit up, very festive and exciting looking, but empty. It doesn't have any, there's no content being communicated here. We could also think of Fluxus, the way some of those performances focus our attention on the actual conditions of musical performance, a concert, the actual conventions or conditions of staging a performance, like Cage's 4 minutes and 33 seconds, maybe not technically a Fluxus piece, but having inspired many other works by Fluxus artists. The piece is silent, right? So our attention is focused on the act of the performer, the musician, the piano player, seating himself or herself at the piano, opening the lid of the instrument, as if they're about to play, and then closing it again at the end, or maybe in between each movement of the piece. You have those other Fluxus works that just consist of a performer on stage taking a bow, and you become aware it's the work because all these rubber balls spill out of the tuba, that the performer is holding. So maybe there's a similar spirit here, a little bit kind of whimsical or humorous, but also focusing our attention on the kind of the elements that normally get overlooked or taken for granted when we are experiencing a spectacle, movie or exhibition opening, something like that, or a protest for that matter. I mean, that's the other way to look at these works, that he's kind of leveling the distinctions between film, as an art form, parties, social gatherings, and political protests. So 3 different types of events, or practices that we ordinarily assign to different categories. But by looking at these pieces and thinking about how they relate to one another, maybe we can see some kind of common ground here. All 3 of these things become a kind of spectacle in a sense. They become part of this larger realm of appearances of fictions, even the ones that take themselves the most seriously or are taken the most seriously, political protests, they partake in the nature of a spectacle. It's the images of the big crowds gathered on in the front of the Washington Monument or whatever that stick in our memories, because those are the images that get picked up by the media, give shape to the event after the fact. All right, Pierre Huy is another member of this group of artists. He is a friend and sometimes collaborator of Philippe Perreno. And he created a series of billboards in France, and displayed them in various neighborhoods. So what is the relationship here between the content of the billboard and the location where it's displayed? Anyone want to make a stab at discussing that, or guessing at a kind of explanation here, how this piece came to be made, maybe?
Well, is the piece just the billboard or the picture? Like, is this a stage?
It's a very good question. It's a very good question, right? Because the caption identifies this picture as actually a poster. So there's the billboard, which is huge. It's 4 by 3 meters, like 12, like 9 feet high, 12 feet long length. The poster is only 80 by 120 centimeters, but it's an offset printed poster. So we know that there were multiple posters produced with this image, and the poster is what we're given to look at here. So it's not even clear that the billboard on its own would or was considered a work of art, although we do have these two dates here, 1994, 1996. Billboard created in 1994, the poster 2 years later.
Well,
So
not really sure.
Yeah, exactly. So, I mean, yeah, we don't, maybe the point is not to come up with an answer to the question of how these things relate, but to think about what kind of questions the work is posing. To begin with, the question of what is the work? Is it the billboard? Is it the photograph? Is it the two together? What other kind of questions do we start to ask ourselves looking at this image?
If the photograph is staged or not?
Yes, for sure. We could even say, either photograph, right? The photograph that's on the billboard could have been staged, but then it also strikes us as a pretty remarkable coincidence that you've got a bunch of people wearing hard hats standing around a wheelbarrow in the background of this billboard. Couldn't that have been staged?
Right.
What would be an argument against that interpretation or explanation? Like, why might you take it for reality or question the idea that this had been staged?
Probably because it's like a construction site and they're doing work. Like, I don't think they would stand there for like however long, like doing that.
Yeah, it looks like an actual construction site. I mean, we can't imagine that the artist, for the sake of this piece, that the city of Paris granted him a permit to cordon off a whole section of this plaza or whatever and tear up the pavement, tear up the concrete to lay some kind of pretend foundations. So it looks like a real construction site. Now that doesn't rule out the possibility that this was staged, but it does make it a lot harder to answer that question. The evidence is conflicting. All right, or what about this one? What kind of questions does this image pose to us?
That one makes it seem more like someone was waiting for the perfect coincidence, I guess.
Yeah. I mean, that's exactly what I wonder looking at this. Did somebody, like the artist or an assistant, camp out across the street just waiting for a woman, who resembled the lady on the billboard to walk by?
Right.
Or, maybe the woman who appears to be returning from her grocery shopping is an actress or was paid to to do this,
Yeah.
dressed up this way. But if that's the case, then we might wonder why she doesn't look exactly like the woman in the photograph. She's wearing a hat that is in the billboard. Sorry, she's wearing the woman in the walking down the street is wearing a hat that we don't see on the head of the woman in the billboard, and that would be, it's a detail that they could have easily corrected if the artist wanted to be the same.
Or they were purposely making it seem coincidental.
Or that, yeah, exactly. So these works, I think you're getting a sense of the underlying spirit that animates a lot of these works. A little bit playful, maybe mischievous, but getting at something. The question of this relationship between the real and its representations, or it's between reality and spectacle, between the real and its kind of spectacular mediations. This is a question that we've seen explored by other artists previously, like Cindy Sherman, and the whole pictures generation, Richard Prince. But whereas you always got a sense in looking at, I always get a sense in looking at Sherman's work that the early untitled film stills, that there's something to learn, this work is going to teach us something about the nature of the media, or the way women are represented in film. I don't get that sense looking at Hui's work, that the artist is providing or promising us even with any kind of answers to these questions. It more becomes this kind of game that the artist is interested in playing with us as viewers, rather than a promising the solution to a mystery, or revealing the secret underlying appearances. You start to question whether there is a reality, maybe underlying appearances, or whether we can even identify the motivations and the intentions that construct these representations. So one of these collaborations I mentioned between Hui and Pereno consisted of a work called No Ghost, Just a Shell. This is a very interesting work in which the artists purchased an anime character. Apparently, there are people, artists or creative types, at any rate, in the anime / manga industry in Japan, whose job it is to come up with characters, not for a specific show or setting or comic strip, but just, characters who have an established backstory, an established appearance, and who can be purchased. They're made available for sale, and they can be purchased by producers of animes or comics who want to save themselves the trouble of developing a new character. So discovering that these characters are available for sale, Hui and Pereno purchased one with the announced intention to set her free. the idea being that these characters, or the joke, if you want to call it that, the conceit of the piece is that these characters are, essentially like slave laborers forced to sustain some kind of fictional narrative or plot arc or whatever, that they are real people who don't have any agency, don't have any say over what happens to them. And so Hui and Pereno were intrigued by the idea of setting free or liberating one of these characters to explore, what that character might do with themselves if they were no longer forced to inhabit this pre-constructed universe of a TV series or a manga. And the name of the character is Ann Lee. They produced various works in different media that explored this idea. I'm going to see if I can find a video that I think used to be on YouTube. I'm not sure. Is that two N's and Ann Lee? I think so. Yeah. So this one, I'll show it to you first. Oh, nice. This is from the PBS show Art 21. Okay, so that just included a couple of brief clips from this video. But what, here, I'll just replay this first part again. Okay, so what do you make of this animation, this kind of video treatment, you could say, of the fictional character of Ann Lee that Hui has created here? What happens in the video? What do we hear? What do we see?
Well, I couldn't hear anything, but I think it's a very interesting concept.
Okay, did you guys not get any of the audio?
No, because your headphones are plugged in, so the audio went straight to your headphones and it's not
Oh,
playing us.
all right.
Yeah, I couldn't hear anything either.
Okay, let me
Yeah,
try
you
that
may also
again.
have to set. You also may have to set it to share your desktop audio. I'm not exactly sure how Zoom works, but I know that's how like Skype and everything else works.
Interesting. All right. Well, that means you wouldn't have gotten very much out of that.
Wait. You see where it says CC in the corner? Well, that's captions. Maybe that would work.
It'll work for Hui maybe. I don't know if it'll work for the video. I'm gonna try. Can you hear anything now? No.
No.
Anything.
Mm-mm.
Can you guys hear that?
Barely.
I hear garbled.
Yeah.
Okay. Well, maybe that's just not going to work. All right. So what you hear when you're watching this video is you hear a recorded voice saying, "It was here at the foot of the volcano that the moon landing," let's see, what does it say? There at the foot of the volcano, it's there at the foot of the volcano that the moon landing tests were filmed. So that's kind of crucial, because all you hear in the video is that voice. You know, it goes on to say more, but that becomes the kind of puzzle that we are trying to piece together when we watch this video. How does this recorded voiceover, this pre-recorded voiceover that sounds very low quality, like it was recorded a long time ago, how does that relate to what we see in the video itself?
Why do you always come here? Oh, sorry.
I wasn't sure if Maya was talking to us or not.
It kind of, it's very like, it's not, I feel like the audio is not caught up with what we're seeing, like technology wise. That makes sense? Because that's very futuristic, and then the audio is like very old school, old. That's
Right.
just very, that's a very
Yeah.
interesting thing.
Yeah, the animation, right, is futuristic. I mean, it's it's like 3D rendering, right? It's a style of animation that only goes back to, 20 or, well, 30 years maybe, let's say 30 or 40 years. But that recording sounds much older. So the voice is talking about the moon landing tests where they were filmed. Does that relate in any way to the landscape that seems to be forming and dissolving around Anne Lee as she or they walk through this space, this fictional space? How would you describe this landscape?
A very geometric moon face, I suppose.
Yeah, it looks, I mean, it's bare and barren and just kind of rocky, right? So it does suggest like a lunar landscape or something like that. That could be a point of connection to this voiceover talking about the moon landing tests. So the focus or this interest in the filming of the moon landing tests is significant because I'm not sure how many of you heard anything about this. For a long time, and for all I know still today, there existed a conspiracy theory which held that there no moon landing had ever actually taken place. That human beings
Oh
had
yeah,
never been to the moon. And when
my
people
brother
would
believes in that theory.
okay, so maybe if you've discussed this with your brother, you can answer this question. You know, what would one of these conspiracy theorists say if you showed them film footage of Neil Armstrong on the moon? I mean,
Well, a lot of them are like, you can't see the footprints, you can't see the shadow.
right,
They're always like, it's on a green screen.
right. Yeah, exactly. So the argument is made that these films were that these were staged, that these things were filmed either on a Hollywood film set or something, and the lack of footprints is the giveaway. This or that thing, you don't see shadows, or the shadows pointing in the wrong direction, or whatever the argument might be. And as evidence, people point to the fact that there were films made of moon landing tests. So there were these tests that were carried out to, as the engineers were working on the problems of how do we, manage to stick the landing, and, how is all this going to work once the astronauts reach the moon. They carried out these tests, as the voiceover said, at the foot of this volcano. So there are films of these tests, and people say, if they made these films of the tests, then they could have easily made other films that are doctored to look like they show an actual landing on the moon's surface. It's not proof that this ever took place. So this recording is responding to the incorporation of this recording. It's referring to these these questions, or these doubts and these anxieties, you could say, in society at large, about the truth of what the media presents us with. Like, how do we know that what the news media says is taking place is actually happening? How do we know that this isn't all just a fiction, or a lie, or a conspiracy that's been cooked up, by the government, or by these people or those people? The interesting thing about the landscape, this animated landscape that we see in Hui's video, is that these formations, which don't really look like, the surface of the moon, maybe they kind of suggest volcanoes, but they spring up into existence and then they fade away. As we're listening to this recorded voice. And what's actually happening here, if you've seen, like a graphic equalizer or something, if you've worked with audio, digital audio, let's say, then you've seen, these, I don't know what to call them, these kind of graphic, visual, representations of the, the wavelengths, the pitch, of a piece of music or a voice. So what we're actually seeing here is a three-dimensional rendering of the different, wavelengths of this voice, the pitch of this voice, as it offers this account of the filming of the moon landing tests. So the landscape that we see is fictional, but in a sense it's also real, because it's a direct transcription of not, you know, the moon's surface, but this recorded account by a, you know, NASA engineer or whoever of the whole, you know, process of carrying out and filming the moon landing tests. So a very complex, very kind of layered investigation of the lines between fiction and reality, but also between different kinds of, you know, different forms of documentation or of recording versus the reality that is supposedly being recorded and then, you know, broadcast or whatever. All right. So it's 1:44 again. And I did promise to end on time today. So just briefly, you know, we spent a lot of time on all these artists because I wanted to give you a sense of how complex their work is and how many different points of reference we could find, whether it's in, you know, the earlier history of contemporary art or in, you know, kind of social issues or questions outside of the realm of art. Because the author of this reading, Claire Bishop, she's an art critic and art historian, she comes down very, she comes down really hard on Bourriel himself in the, you know, the kinds of aspirations that he sets forth for this type of art, the kind of utopian aspects of relational aesthetics as he defines it or explains it, this idea that that sociality or interpersonal relationships and exchanges and communications can provide this new, more democratic space in which for artists to work within. She's very skeptical of that, and as a kind of counter argument or as a kind of refutation of Bourriel's position, she presents the work of the artist Santiago Sierra, very controversial artist, who has carried out all of these projects and these actions or events that openly traffic in the idea of you know, kind of exploitation of participants, of human subjects. So in contrast to the kind of, you know, happy kumbaya, hippy dippy types of participation invited by a work like Rirkrit Tervenija's Free, we get the artist Santiago Sierra paying a group of prostitutes, drug-addicted prostitutes, to have a line tattooed across their backs, paying them the exact amount they need to afford one dose of heroin. So all these heroin-addicted prostitutes are allowing their bodies to be used for this artwork, this art project, and not in a way that, you know, it clearly is not in a way that they would have ordinarily chosen or preferred. You know, even as tattooing goes, and tattooing is obviously a very permanent intervention on the body. they are not being asked to tattoo themselves with something beautiful or with something, you know, visually appealing, but a simple line, you know, that kind of negates their individuality, and just links them all by this one common thread of their addiction, their dependence, their vulnerability. This is a similar work carried out on unemployed youth or young men from the city of Old Havana in Cuba. They were paid $30 each to have this line tattooed across their backs. I forget the details of this piece. I think it was a person who was paid to kind of live within this confined space for 360 hours within the gallery, behind this brick wall. And their only means of communication with the outside world was this little gap at the level of the floor where they could receive like food and water and so forth. There's another piece, I believe this action took place at the Venice Biennale in 2001. In the city of Venice, in northern Italy, there are groups of primarily North African immigrants who make their living by setting out kind of touristy items for sale on blankets that they spread in the street or in the sidewalk. Sierra got in contact or you know, made this offer to a large number of these immigrant street vendors to pay them money in exchange for their in exchange for their agreeing to have their hair dyed blonde. And you know, as many of them were from Africa, this immediately, you know, this kind of unnaturally bleached blonde hair made them immediately identifiable, immediately recognizable as they went about their daily activities, and you know, living this kind of marginal existence in the streets of Venice, where their commercial activities were not legal. The street vendors were constantly in danger of being arrested and fined by the police, who would carry out these periodic sweeps of different neighborhoods, round up all of the street vendors who didn't escape in time and find the money, like confiscate their goods and their earnings. So by making them more visible, Sierra is calling attention to their presence in this city that's, you know, every 2 years becomes a major destination for these wealthy, you know, art collecting elite, but also maybe makes them more vulnerable to police actions and so forth. So that these other spaces, workers who are don't have legal permission to work in the country or paid to remain inside cardboard boxes. You know, all of his works, or many of his works, are based on similar premises. And, you know, the natural response that we have to something like this is, you know, how can this be considered art? Or, you know, even if this is art, this is deeply immoral. This is exploitative. Bishop is making the argument, which you may or may not, agree with or find convincing, that Sierra's work is is making a really important point, that he is highlighting the contradictions between the position of the artist and the position of the powerless, these people who are powerless in society. That even as if an artist might want to identify with the powerless, or might try to make work that that is open and democratic and free in all these different ways, the artist occupies this privileged position, especially an artist who exhibits, widely and is successful. And that Sierra, in a sense, is more honest in acknowledging, in making his own position of privilege more apparent through the exploitation of these people who do not possess privilege, who do not have any power. And he is also he's refusing to look for easy answers, essentially. So as a counter argument to Bourriaud's celebration of relational aesthetics, Claire Bishop is arguing for something which she calls antagonism. This idea that real dissent, real protest is always centered in some kind of antagonistic relationship, and that the only way to address problems in society is by facing up to the real violence and the real antagonisms that exist, rather than trying to sweep them under the rug, or pretend that we can somehow get around them or avoid them. And like I say, you guys will have to make up your own minds about this comparison, and whether you agree with the points that she makes. I think one thing certainly that I hope I was able to show is that the artists who Bourriaud is championing, their work is maybe not as simplistic as his own descriptions of it make them appear. That there's more going on at least in some cases, the case of some of these artists, than the simple kind of post-60s celebration of communal festivity and conviviality and so forth. And I don't necessarily expect that anyone will be converted to an appreciation of Sierra's work, because it's the kind of stuff that is hard to like or even defend. So I guess we have to give Claire Bishop some credit for making the attempt. All right. So that's it for today. The other things I mentioned in my email: Tuesday, we'll be having a discussion of the Lindsay Moore reading. That's the optional reading.
Mhm.
And our discussion will be based on the prompts that that you guys submit, those discussion questions.
Mhm.
And the reading can be found in the course readings folder. Lindsay Moore. It's right here. And then Thursday, we'll be talking about the final exam. So I will save that discussion for next week, but I'm going to be covering the format, the the due date, and so forth. My thinking at this point is that it will be like a kind of like a take-home exam where you're given 4 comparisons, and then you have to write a short essay about each one, maybe answer some specific questions. But like I said, I'll go into more details about that next week, and we can do a little review.
Mm.
Sound good?
Sounds good.
Ah.
Yes.
Yup, yup.
All right. Thanks, guys.
Thank you.
I appreciated your comments and questions today, and I hope you guys all have a good weekend.
Me too.
You
Thanks.
too.
Thanks very much.
Yep.
All right. Ciao. See you next week.
See you next
Bye.